I was sitting at my kitchen table in Chicago when my phone lit up. It was a Thursday evening in October. The kind of evening where the city goes quiet before the cold fully arrives. That strange, suspended stillness between seasons. I had a mug of black coffee going cold to my left, a stack of grant paperwork to my right, and on the television behind me, a news segment was wrapping up. I hadn't been watching it closely. I was tired in the way that only people who've been building something from nothing for years truly understand. Then my phone buzzed. Houston area code. A number I hadn't called in 3 years. My mother. I let it ring 4 times. Then voicemailed at 62 seconds. I listened to the whole thing once. Then I deleted it. Not out of rage. Not out of cruelty. I deleted it the way you close a chapter in a book you've already finished. Carefully and without regret. What she saw on that news segment was a White House recognition of the nonprofit I had built from a $187,000 inheritance and 4 years of stubborn, unglamorous work. What she didn't see, what she never saw, was everything it took to get there. The years she and my sister and my aunts spent making me feel like a problem to be managed, rather than a daughter to be loved. But I'm getting ahead of myself to understand why I deleted that voicemail. You need to understand what came before it. And that story starts in a different kitchen, in a different city, on a February night when I had just come home from war. My name is Jessica Reyes. I'm 34 years old now, and I run a non-profit organization in Chicago called Grounded and Standing, a transitional housing and support network for women veterans who have been separated from their families, whether by circumstance, conflict, or the particular kind of cruelty that wears a smile at holiday dinners. I know that last category well. 'Cause I lived it. I grew up on Houston's north side, in a neighborhood where the houses are small and the pride runs enormous. My grandmother may owned a 3-bedroom on Fulton Street that always smelled like Fabuloso and something frying on the stove. My mother, Lorraine, raised my older sister Danielle and me in an apartment 6 blocks away. We weren't poor in the way people dramatize poverty. We were working poor, which means you have just enough to survive and absolutely nothing left over for error. No safety net. No cushion. Just the next bill and the prayer that nothing breaks. I enlisted in the U.S. Army at 19 years old. I will be honest about why. I wanted out. Not out of love for my family. I was 19. I loved them in that unexamined way you love people before you've had enough life to compare them to anything. I wanted out of the financial gravity of that neighborhood. I wanted to be somebody who chose something. The Army felt like a door I could actually open. What happened after I opened it was not what I expected, and also exactly what I expected depending on which part you're asking about. I trained as a combat medic. I deployed to Iraq twice, once at 21, once at 23. I will not spend a long time in the details of what I saw there because this story is not about that. What I will say is this. I was good at my job. Genuinely, documentably good. My second deployment, I was part of a team in Mosul during an IED incident that put 4 soldiers down simultaneously. I worked on all 4. 3 of them walked out of that situation alive. I was awarded the Purple Heart for injuries sustained in that same incident. Shrapnel to my left forearm and shoulder from a secondary blast. Have the medal. I have the paperwork. Have the scars. What I didn't have when I came home at 25 with an honorable discharge and a PTSD diagnosis was a soft place to land. I flew into Houston on a Tuesday in February. My mother picked me up from the airport with her husband Gerald, whom she had married while I was on my first deployment. She told me about the wedding via a 2-paragraph email. I found out she'd been dating him from a Facebook photo. But that's a detail I'll come back to. That first night, I slept on the couch in my mother's living room because my old bedroom had become Gerald's home office. I told myself it was temporary. I had some savings, not much, about $2,200, and a plan to contact the VA the next morning about housing assistance and mental health services. The VA process, for anyone who hasn't navigated it, is not fast. It is not gentle. It is not designed for someone who is already exhausted and quietly coming apart at the seams. I spent the first 3 weeks filling out forms, being rerouted between offices, and being told my case was in processing. I had nightmares 3 or 4 nights a week. I startled at sounds. I didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about it because there was no one in that house who was asking. Gerald was polite in the way that people are polite when they are counting the days until an inconvenience resolves itself. He didn't yell. He didn't make scenes. He simply made the geometry of that house very clear, very quietly. His space. His schedule. His kitchen, in the way that men who marry into a household immediately begin treating it like an acquisition. I remember the specific night I understood I had no place there. It was a Wednesday, about 11 days after I came home. I was up at 2 a.m. because I couldn't sleep, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water, and Gerald came downstairs for something and stopped when he saw me. He looked at me for a moment, not unkindly, but with a particular blankness, and then he said, "How much longer are you planning to be here?" Not aggressive, not loud, just a question. I said I didn't know yet. He nodded, got his glass of water and went back upstairs. I sat at that table for another hour. 11 days home from 2 combat deployments. A Purple Heart in my bag that nobody in that house had asked to see. How much longer are you planning to be here? I have never forgotten that sentence. Not because it was the worst thing said to me, it wasn't, not even close, not in that family. I remember it because it was the first time I understood, with perfect clarity, that surviving the war was only the beginning of the fight. The real one was just starting. Let me tell you how a family erases someone. It doesn't happen with dramatic confrontations. It doesn't happen in one explosive moment you can point to and say, that is when it started. It happens in accumulation. It happens in the small, consistent, barely deniable moments that individually sound like nothing and together amount to a slow burial. My family was expert at this. And they had been practicing on me for years before I ever left for the army. The first example I'll give you starts before I even deployed. When I was 17 years old and in my senior year of high school, my mother sat Danielle and me down and told us she had been seeing someone. His name was Gerald Hutchins. He was 51, a project manager for a commercial construction company, divorced, with 2 adult children of his own in Dallas. He seemed happy. I remember being cautiously glad for her. What I did not know was that by the time I shipped out to basic training at 19, she had already decided to marry him. What I also did not know was that they had set a date, booked a venue, a banquet hall in the Galleria area, $72 a plate, and invited 43 people to the wedding. I was not one of the 43. Found out via email. 2 paragraphs, no attachment, no photo. Sent 3 days after the ceremony. I remember staring at my phone in the barracks, reading it twice, then putting my phone face down on my bunk and going to do pull-ups until my arms gave out. I did not respond to the email for 4 days. When I did, I kept it to 3 sentences. She wrote back saying she hadn't wanted to stress me out during training. I was her daughter. I was 19. I was in basic training, not a coma. That email set the template for how my family would treat my absence for the next 6 years. As a convenient excuse not to include me in anything, and as a reason to feel vaguely heroic about it. She's busy. He's far away. She has her own thing going on. The subtext was always, she's not quite part of this family in the way we need her to be. She's difficult to accommodate. The second example is my sister Danielle. And I want to be precise here because I don't want to be unfair to her. Danielle is not a villain in the cinematic sense. She is something more insidious. She is someone who decided very early that the easiest way to maintain her position in the family was to position herself as the stable one by contrast. And I, with my deployments and my PTSD and my disrupted timeline, was a very useful contrast. Danielle married at 26, had her first child at 28, bought a house in Pearland with her husband Damon, and built what everyone in the family described as a real life. I do not begrudge her any of that. What I begrudge is the way she used it. There was a family dinner, Thanksgiving the year I came back about 8 months after I'd moved to Chicago. I wasn't there. I was still in the early stages of getting my bearings. Therapy twice a week, a part-time job at a community center, a shared apartment with 2 women I barely knew. Danielle was there with Damon and the baby, and according to my cousin Tiffany, who told me this in a text that I screenshot and still have, when one of the aunts asked how I was doing, Danielle said, "She's up in Chicago doing her own thing. You know Jessica, she always had to be somewhere else. She could never just settle. She always had to be somewhere else. I was in Iraq. I came home wounded. I did not choose to be unsettled. I chose to serve and then I chose to survive, and now I was choosing slowly and painfully to rebuild." But in Danielle's framing, I was simply a woman who couldn't commit. Who couldn't just settle. Like my 2 deployments were a personality flaw. Like the duffel bag I came home with was a character indictment. I didn't confront her about it. I filed it. The third example, and perhaps the one that burned the longest, involves my Aunt Rosa. Rosa is my mother's older sister, the family's self-appointed historian and moral authority. She is the woman who brings up the past at every gathering, who tells the same 5 stories about the family's struggles and her own sacrifices, and who controls the family narrative the way a small-town newspaper controls local politics. Quietly, consistently, and with total confidence that no one will check her sources. Sometime during my second deployment, Aunt Rosa began telling people I had been let go from the military. Not discharged. Not finished my service. Let go. The implication was clear. I had done something. There had been some incident, some failure, some black mark that resulted in my removal. I found out about this from my cousin Marcus, who texted me a photo of a Facebook comment Aunt Rosa had left on a family friend's post, in which she wrote, and I am quoting from the screenshot I took and saved, "Jessica had some difficulties in the service, you know how it is with some kids, but she's home now and we're hoping she gets herself together. Some difficulties in the service." I had a Purple Heart in a box in my duffel bag. I had 3 commendations in my discharge paperwork. I had worked on 4 bleeding soldiers in the dust of Mosul and brought 3 of them home. Some difficulties in the service. I did not call Rosa. I did not comment on the post. I did not ask my mother to correct the record, because I already understood by then that my mother would not. Correcting the record would have required choosing her daughter over her sister, and Reyes, Lorraine Hutchins now, had already shown me, clearly and repeatedly, where her loyalties settled when the choice got uncomfortable. What they didn't know was that I was paying attention to all of it. Every dinner I wasn't invited to. Every narrative quietly revised. Every question not asked about my service, my scars, my healing. I was paying attention. And I was remembering. Because the woman they were describing, unstable, difficult, dramatic, broken, that woman did not exist. And I was going to spend the next several years building proof of that. That was the moment everything shifted. Not with rage. With resolve. 2 years after I moved to Chicago, my grandmother turned 75. Grandma May called me herself. Not through my mother, not through a group text, but directly from her landline on a Sunday morning. She said, "Jessica baby, I need to see your face. Come home for my birthday." That was all she needed to say. I bought a round-trip ticket on a Wednesday for $214, booked a rental car, and packed a single carry-on bag. I want to be clear about where I was at that point in my life because it matters. I was not the same woman who had sat frozen at that kitchen table 2 years earlier while Gerald asked how long I'd be staying. I had been in therapy for 18 months. A VA counselor named Dr. Pamela Osei who did not let me minimize or deflect, who made me work, who charged me nothing because I had earned that benefit with my body. I had completed 2 semesters of community college and was enrolled in a social work program at Northeastern Illinois University. I had a part-time job coordinating volunteers at a veterans outreach center on the west side. I had also started writing. Not for publication, just for myself. A notebook I kept on my nightstand where I recorded things that happened, things that were said, things I noticed. I had been doing this since Dr. Osei suggested it in our third session. By the time I flew back to Houston for that birthday party, I had filled 2 notebooks. I landed on a Friday evening. The party was Saturday afternoon at Aunt Rosa's house in Missouri City. A backyard gathering, maybe 40 people, catered trays from a barbecue place on Scott Street that Grandma May had loved since the 1980s. I arrived in a navy wrap dress and my hair done. I looked, by any reasonable measure, like a woman who was doing well. I felt like one too, which was new and which I was still learning to trust. For the first 2 hours, things were fine in the surface way that family gatherings are fine when everyone agrees, silently and collectively, not to acknowledge the weight underneath. I talked to cousins I hadn't seen in years. I sat with Grandma May and held her hand and made her laugh. She touched my face twice and said, "You look like yourself again, baby. You look like the real you." I almost cried at that. Held it. Then came the toast. Gerald, my mother's husband, a man who shares no blood with anyone in that backyard, somehow positioned himself as the person to make the family toast at my grandmother's birthday party. I still don't fully understand how that happened. I think he simply picked up a glass and started talking, and nobody stopped him because that is how Gerald operated in that family. He moved into spaces and nobody stopped him. He went through the family. He mentioned my mother, Lorraine, who holds this family together. He mentioned Danielle, building a beautiful life with Damon and little Kayla. He mentioned my cousins Marcus and Tiffany. He mentioned Aunt Rosa and her husband. He mentioned 3 people I barely knew. He did not mention me. 40 people in that backyard. My grandmother's 75th birthday. I was standing 8 feet from him holding a plastic cup of sweet tea, and he looked past me like I was part of the fence. There was a beat of silence after the toast. My cousin Marcus, bless him, looked at me with an expression I can only describe as horrified apology. He started to say something. Before he could, my cousin Keisha asked, brightly and probably innocently, "What about Jessica? She came all the way from Chicago." What followed lasted maybe 15 seconds. Felt longer. Danielle laughed. Not cruelly, but in that dismissive exhale laugh that women use to minimize things before they say them. Then she said, "Jessica's always got something going on up there. We don't really keep up with all of it." She said we like it was a consensus. Like it was a shared and reasonable position. Then my mother, set down her plate and added in the gentle concerned voice she uses when she wants to sound caring while actually being devastating, "We just worry about her, you know? Jessica has always been someone who struggles. We pray for her. She struggles. We pray for her." In front of 40 people. At my grandmother's birthday. 2 years after I came home from war with shrapnel scars on my arm and a diagnosis I had been fighting every single day to manage. 2 years after I had left their house with $400 and rebuilt myself from the tile up. She struggles. We pray for her. Smiled. I took a sip of my sweet tea. I said, "That's kind, Mom," in a voice so even and unbothered that Danielle actually looked confused for a moment. Then I excused myself. I walked around the side of the house to the driveway, got into my rental car, a white Nissan Altima that smelled like someone else's air freshener, and I sat there for exactly 11 minutes. I know it was 11 because I watched the clock on the dashboard. I did not cry. I had cried enough in that city. What I did was take out my phone and open my notes app, and I typed in plain language every single thing that had just been said, by whom, in front of whom, and at what time. Then I drove back to my grandmother's party, ate a plate of brisket and potato salad, and spent the rest of the afternoon sitting next to Grandma May, who held my hand and told me stories about her own mother I had never heard before. 3 months later, Grandma May was gone. And everything changed. Grandma May died on a Tuesday morning in January at home, in her bed on Fulton Street, the way she had always said she wanted to go. She was 75 years old and she had, according to her doctor, simply and peacefully stopped. Her heart gave out in the early morning hours while the rest of Houston was still asleep. My cousin Marcus called me at 6:47 a.m. I was already awake. I had learned some years earlier not to count on sleep past 5. I booked a flight for that evening. $340 one way, because I didn't know how long I'd need to stay. The family descended on Houston the way families do in grief, loudly, emotionally, with a layer of logistical anxiety underneath everything because someone has to manage the arrangements and everyone wants input and nobody wants responsibility. My mother and Aunt Rosa assumed, as they always had, that Grandma May's affairs were a known quantity. Grandma May had a paid-off house on Fulton Street, 3 bedrooms, a detached garage, a backyard with a fig tree she had tended for 30 years. She had a savings account at a credit union on Alameda Road. The family's general understanding, never put in writing, never formally discussed, was that these things would be divided among her children. My mother, Aunt Rosa, and my Uncle Darnell in Atlanta. That understanding was wrong. I did not know it was wrong yet either. I flew in, I helped with the arrangements. I sat in the front row at the funeral in a black dress, and I held my grandmother's photograph during the repast, and I did not speak much to my mother or my aunts. I was grieving. We were all grieving, whatever else was true between us. 8 days after the funeral, I was back in Chicago. 11 days after that, I received a phone call from a woman named Patricia Vance. Patricia Vance was an estate attorney, based in Houston's Midtown, and she had been retained by my grandmother to manage her will. She was professional, measured, and direct. She told me she had been trying to reach me for several days and was glad she'd found the right number. She said she needed to inform me that I was named in my grandmother's will and asked if I could come to her office, or if I preferred she walk me through the document by phone first. I asked her to tell me what the document said. She told me. My grandmother had updated her will 18 months before her death. 14 months specifically, before the birthday party where my mother told 40 people she prayed for me because I struggled. The will named me, Jessica Marie Reyes, as the sole beneficiary of the property at Fulton Street and the balance of the savings account at the credit union. The property had been assessed at $187,000. The savings account held $23,400. There was also, and this is the part that stopped my breathing for a moment, a handwritten letter, sealed, addressed to me by name. Patricia Vance told me my grandmother had given it to her personally, and asked that it be delivered to me upon her death, privately, before any family communications about the estate. I asked Patricia to mail me the letter overnight. It arrived 2 days later. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd listened to my mother's voicemail months later, the same table where all my important moments seemed to happen, and I opened it. I will not read you the whole letter. Some things are not meant to be shared. But I will tell you what Grandma May said, in her looping, careful handwriting on 3 pages of cream stationery. She told me she had watched what happened to me when I came home. She had watched it from 6 blocks away, and it had troubled her every day since. She wrote, "They treated your service like an inconvenience and your healing like a character flaw, and I am ashamed that I did not say more at the time." She told me she had updated the will because she wanted me to have a foundation, something underneath me that nobody could take. She wrote, "You were always the one who kept going. I want to make sure you have something to go with." I read that letter 4 times. Then I sat very still for a while. Then I called Patricia Vance back and told her I was ready to proceed. What I did not do, and this is important, was call my mother, or Danielle, or Aunt Rosa. I did not post anything on social media. I did not tell a single mutual family contact. I did not give any signal in any direction that anything had changed. Because I had been the invisible one in that family for a very long time. And I had learned by then that invisibility has its uses. What they didn't know was that the woman they had toasted around, prayed over, and quietly buried in their own narrative, that woman had just inherited the house they all assumed was theirs. And I hadn't said a word yet. That was the moment everything shifted, that I want to be very precise about what I did next because I think it matters. I did not make a single emotional decision in the weeks that followed. Not one. Every move I made came from a list. A literal written list that I made on a legal pad the evening after I spoke to Patricia Vance, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the kind of cold, clarifying focus I hadn't felt since the field. In the army, when you're working a casualty, there is no room for feeling. Feeling comes later. First you assess. You triage. You stabilize. You work the problem in the correct sequence. I worked the problem. Step 1. I called Patricia Vance back and formally confirmed my intent to accept the full inheritance and proceed with probate. She explained the timeline. Texas probate for an uncontested will typically runs 4 to 6 months. She explained that until probate closed, the property technically remained part of the estate, but that as named beneficiary I had legal standing to act in the estate's interest, including changing locks and restricting access to prevent waste or unauthorized removal of assets. I asked her to put that in writing for me. She did. Step 2. I hired a Houston-based real estate attorney named Carl Demps, referred to me by Patricia, to sit alongside the probate process and advise me on the property specifically. Carl had been practicing for 22 years and had the particular energy of a man who had seen every variation of family property dispute imaginable and found none of them surprising. When I explained the family dynamics, he nodded once and said, "Then we move quietly and we move first." Those were the right words. Step 3. I contacted a licensed locksmith in Houston and arranged for the locks on the Fulton Street property to be changed on a specific Thursday morning, 3 weeks after my grandmother's funeral, while I knew from family group chat activity that my mother and aunts were occupied with a repast follow-up gathering at Rose's house. New locks, new keys. One set to me in Chicago, one set held by Patricia's office. Step 4. I said nothing to anyone in the family for 17 days. 17 days of normal. 17 days of occasional group text responses, a thumbs up here, a thinking of you there. While behind the scenes, the probate filing was moving through the Harris County court system with my name on it. On day 18, Aunt Rosa drove to Fulton Street to collect several pieces of furniture she had decided belonged to her. A china cabinet, a bedroom dresser, and Grandma May's sewing table, which Rosa had apparently already promised to her daughter. I know this because Rosa posted about it on Facebook before she went, writing that she was going to collect Mama's things before everything gets complicated. She arrived to find a changed lock and a notice affixed to the front door. A formal estate notice, drafted by Patricia's office and authorized by the probate court, stating that the property was under estate administration and that removal of any assets without executor authorization was prohibited. Rosa called my mother, my mother called me. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 17 seconds long and her voice was very controlled in the way that people's voices get when they are trying not to sound as alarmed as they are. She said she had heard there was some kind of legal thing with Mama's house and she was sure it was a misunderstanding and she hoped we could talk. Some kind of legal thing. I called her back 40 minutes later. I was calm. I told her there was no misunderstanding. I told her that Grandma May had updated her will 18 months ago and that the property in the savings account had been left to me, and that the estate was in probate, and that Patricia Vance's contact information was available if anyone had questions. There was a silence on the line that lasted several seconds. Then my mother said, "She wouldn't do that." I said, "She did." Then I told her I had a meeting to get to, and I wished her a good evening and I hung up. I sat for a moment after that call. Not in triumph. Just in stillness. The next noise in that situation was going to come from their side. I could wait. The family did not take it quietly. I want to be honest about that. There were phone calls. Many of them from numbers I mostly let go to voicemail. There was a letter from a Houston attorney retained by Aunt Rosa, suggesting the will update had occurred under undue influence and requesting documentation. Patricia Vance responded on my behalf with the full paper trail. The date of the will update, the 2 independent witnesses, the notarization, and a signed letter from Grandma May's physician confirming she had been fully mentally competent at the time of signing. The undue influence claim was dropped within 3 weeks. It cost Aunt Rosa approximately $2,200 in legal fees to discover that her mother had made a clear-eyed, well-documented, entirely legal decision. There was a longer, more painful conversation with my mother. Not a fight, which somehow made it worse. She called me on a Sunday and asked me, in a quiet voice, if I had known. If I had known before the birthday party, before the funeral, before any of it. I told her no. She was quiet for a while. Then she said she felt like Grandma May had been angry with the family. I told her I thought Grandma May had simply been paying attention. That conversation ended without resolution. Most honest conversations do. What I did with the inheritance was not impulsive. I sat with it for 6 weeks before I moved $1. I was still in my social work program. I was still in therapy. I was still the woman with a part-time job at the Veterans Outreach Center, still taking the Blue Line to campus twice a week, still keeping my notebook on my nightstand. But I had $210,400 underneath me now. And I had a grandmother's handwriting telling me to go with it. I sold the Fulton Street property 14 months after the probate closed. Houston's 3rd Ward market had shifted in my favor. Carl Demps advised me to wait, and he was right. I cleared $194,000 after fees and taxes. Combined with the savings account, I had just over $217,000. I kept $47,000 in a personal account as a foundation, the floor Grandma May had wanted me to have. The rest I used to incorporate in seed fund Grounded and Standing, a 501(c)(3) nonprofit providing transitional housing, mental health navigation, and family reunification support for women veterans in Chicago and eventually Houston. The name came from something Dr. Osei said to me in one of our early sessions. She said, "The goal isn't to be unaffected. The goal is to be grounded enough that the thing that hits you doesn't take you off your feet. Grounded and standing. That was the goal. That became the name. In the first year we served 11 women. In the second year 26. By the third year we had a federal grant from the Department of Veterans Affairs, $340,000 renewable annually, and a second location in Houston's 3rd Ward, 2 blocks from where Grandma May's house used to stand. In year 4, a staffer at the White House's Joining Forces Initiative, a program focused on military families and veterans, contacted us about being included in a briefing on women veteran welfare. We flew to Washington in September. I sat in a room with 7 other nonprofit leaders and 2 senior White House advisors and talked about the specific, under-discussed crisis of women veterans who come home to broken or absent family support systems. They featured us in the briefing materials. A local Houston news affiliate picked up the story. They ran a segment. They used a photo of me standing in front of the Grounded and Standing banner in our Houston office. Navy blazer, arms relaxed, the way you stand when you've stopped bracing for impact. My mother saw that segment on a Thursday evening in October. I called. I let it ring. She left 62 seconds of crying and my name and "I'm so proud and I hope you're okay and I miss you." I listened once. I deleted it. I want to explain that because I know how it sounds and I don't want to be misunderstood. I did not delete it out of spite. I am not a person who lives in revenge. I deleted it because I understood with complete clarity that the call was not really about me. It was about her. About what she felt watching her daughter on a television screen after years of absence. The pride in her voice was real, but it was also the pride of someone who wanted back into something she had helped burn down. I had built Grounded and Standing for women who came home to nothing. I was one of those women. I was not going to manage my mother's feelings about that at the cost of the peace I had spent years constructing, 1 therapy session and 1 legal filing and 1 grant application at a time. What she had given me, inadvertently, across all those years of small erasures and public dismissals and quiet choices made in my absence, what she had given me was the complete, irrefutable proof that I did not need her version of me to survive. I needed my own. And if you are listening to this right now, if you are the person in your family who is prayed over rather than believed in, managed rather than loved, erased in the toasts and explained away to the cousins, I want you to hear this. The most devastating thing you will ever do to the people who underestimated you is not revenge. It is arrival. It is showing up fully as the person they told you that you couldn't be, and building something so real and so grounded that their silence about it becomes the loudest thing in the room. Grandma May saw me. She always had. I'm just finally learning to see myself the same way I get asked sometimes. By women at our intake desk, by volunteers who've heard pieces of my story, occasionally by strangers on the internet, whether I regret any of it. Whether I wish I had fought harder for my family's love. Whether I miss them. The honest answer is, I miss the family I needed them to be. I don't miss the one they chose to be. There is a difference, and learning to hold that difference without bitterness is, I think, the actual work. Not the legal filings. Not the inheritance. Not even the non-profit. As proud as I am of every woman we've served. The real work was learning that I was not broken because broken people raised me. That I was not difficult because I was inconvenient to people who preferred easy. That surviving, done with intention and honesty and the right kind of help, is not the consolation prize. It is the whole point. Grandma May knew that. I know it now too. And if you've ever been underestimated by the very people who were supposed to see you, I hope you remember that was never the truth about you. It was only ever the truth about their limits. If this story found you at the right time, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop it in the comments below. And if you know someone who came home from something hard, military service, a difficult family, a season of life that didn't go the way it was supposed to, and who is quietly rebuilding, share this with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone is proof that the other side exists. Subscribe if you're new here. And I'll see you in the next one.